really like to thank Marta for her care, her attention, the way she's organised this, brought us together and looked after us very well. So please thank her. Okay, so what do we mean by smell? We're going to talk about the pleasures of smell. What do we actually mean by smell? Was it that smell was really what Proust was talking about when we talk about the Proust phenomenon? Remember, people talk about the Proust phenomenon, this idea that you have a smell and it takes you right back to your grandmother's kitchen and you were right there. I mean, it's a good question for philosophers and epistemology, whether it really does. I mean, people think, oh, that smell takes me right back. But we can't tell whether it does, and that was exactly what the smell was like, or whether it just gives them a strong sense, like déjà vu, that was what it was like. So it's a hard thing to test. Some people are creating psychological experiments to try to find the evidence of the Proust phenomenon. Rachel Hertz is one, but there's a lot of controversy about it. But notice that if you look at the original Proust text, he talks about dipping the Madeleine into tea, into the tilleul, and then putting it in his mouth, and then it's not as though suddenly something happened. It was, 50-odd pages goes on from there until he says, oh, and now comes back the gardens and the bedroom and the trees and the lines and so on. But it is actually interesting, both because it's doing something which I think is terribly important, it's doing something cross-modal. You're getting actually smell, not taste, but smell with taste, which is actually giving you the Proust phenomenon, the recurring of past memory, and he's getting visual images from that. When you read the section and you get past the 50 pages of groaning, oh, let me see again, oh, no, it's going, oh, it's fading, let me try, blah, blah, blah. When you go through it, you find out that, I know, it's...
So you don't like this, right?
No, sentences are too long. They're great for the French, but they're too long. But he needed an editor. There was that sense, though, in which what it's doing is it's a olfactory memory that's bringing visual images to mind. So it's very interesting that it's not that it recalls past smells. For him, it recalls places. So I think we have to bear that in mind. So when we talk about the Proust phenomenon, and we're actually talking about smell, we're talking about one of two senses of smell. So here are your two senses of smell, orthonasal and retronasal. There are two ways in which odors make it to the nose. You may have heard about this already. So one way is just when you sniff, and that's taking odors from the outside up to the olfactory epithelium, and the other way, of course, is odors traveling from the mouth through the nasopharynx and to the very same place. But what's really cute about the fact that these odors travel in two different directions is that the brain cares. And what the brain does is it treats those signals rather differently depending on the direction of airflow. So you project to slightly different cortical areas, according to Cerf du Castel and Dana Small, that you're projecting to slightly different areas depending on which way the air is passing the very same receptors. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we experience that ourselves a little later on. So you've got these two senses of smell, the internal and the external. Now, why evolutionarily would we have two senses of smell? And we're among the few animals who do, because of the articulation of our apparatus and because we're upright. But the one reason why you do is because smell externally is giving you information about the environment. Predators, smoke, mates, all the things that matter out there. The internal sense of smell is giving you a detection of whether what you've eaten is any good or you want to reject it. Is this something contaminated? Was it okay? Does it pass? So you've got these two rather different jobs that the two senses of smell are doing. And of course, we confuse taste and smell. If I give you some vanilla pods, if I'd brought some, I would hand them out, and I'd say, you say to people, what is this, what does it smell like? And they say, oh, it smells sweet. Sweet's a taste. But notice how easily you make that cross-modal leap. Very, very, very easily. And of course, if you ate a bit of the pod, it's actually bitter. It's not sweet at all. So it's easy to see that you don't have olfactory receptors for sucrose. It cannot be that it really smells sweet. It's got to be an association. And it's a very powerful association. So there are two ways in which taste and smell interact. One is orthonasal and one is retronasal. So even though, and actually I should go back because I think I want to just show you this, yeah. What happens when you have odors passing from the mouth to the nose is that you don't notice that that's a smell. You tend to experience what we call the flavor as though it's happening in your mouth. All your tongue can actually give you is salt, sweet, sour, bitter, umami, savory, and metallic. There's a little bit of debate just now about whether you have fat receptors. Probably don't, might have fatty acid receptors, which is indicative of that. That's all the tongue can give you. But think of all the things you can taste. Mint, pineapple, cinnamon, chicken, beef, lamb. You don't have receptors for those. Where are my chicken receptors? That's smell, right? That's smell. So what's interesting is that you wouldn't be able to detect the difference between raw apple and raw potato when you're holding your nose. And when you get the flavor of those different foodstuffs, it's only because you're getting an experience of an odor, but you refer that experience to the mouth. Why is that? It's interesting why you do that. It's probably because, well, there are different views about that. Probably because you're actually in contact with the foodstuff in your mouth, so you're getting tactile stimulation, and it might be easy for the brain to think it all comes from the same place. It's rather like the ventriloquist illusion. When you're watching a movie in the cinema, you think the voices are coming from the actors' mouths. They can't be. How could that happen? They're coming from the side of the theatre, under your seat, maybe back, behind you. But what happens is the brain is getting simultaneous information from the moving lips synchronized with the speech sounds, and it relocates. You get visual capture of auditory attention. So maybe it's something like that that's going on that refers those smells to the mouth. But notice that when you've swallowed something and you have what you call an aftertaste, it's actually an after smell. Everything's gone from the mouth and you're not getting salt, sweet, sour, bitter. So there are two sorts of interactions that I want to talk about. So that's one of the interactions, that there's a fusing or a confusing of retronasal olfaction and gustation into a single thing, which we call taste, but is in fact flavor. The second taste-smell interaction is the one we talked about, where vanilla smells sweet. So you get what's called the sweetness enhancement effect. It's very nice. So wines are often, especially in this country, soaked in barrels, left in barrels for a long time, steeped in an oak barrel. And the oak gives out vanillin compound from the whiskey lactones. And when you smell the wine and you smell vanilla, it will make the wine taste sweeter. We know that if you give people the same sucrose solutions and you get them with a nose clip to distinguish them very precisely, when you give them exactly the same sucrose solution with a vanilla odor, it tastes sweeter. Now, you might think that's our association between vanilla and sweet things. No, because if I give you subthreshold, just subthreshold sucrose, just subthreshold vanilla, you get sweetness. Okay, so it's not you doing it. The brain is doing it because it's learned that association. And that's also why you have vanilla ice creams, one of the favorite ice creams of manufacturers. They don't have to use as much sugar. It tastes sweeter and you can use less. So it's maybe even healthier to use the sweetness enhancement effect. But you also get bitterness enhancement. Olive oil. If you're having an olive oil and and you add the odor of cut grass, it makes the olive oil taste bitter. When you put those two things together, you're smelling some odor of cut grass and tasting the olive oil, it makes it taste bitter. So it's a bitterness enhancement. Now, you also get tastes induced by smell going the other way. So you sometimes get it that, we've talked about how smells influence tastes. You also have tastes influencing odors. Maybe you did this yesterday, I don't know, but it's a nice experiment to do. You eat a piece of chewing gum until all the chewing gum loses its minty flavor. And then you take it out of your mouth and you roll it in a little bit of icing sugar. Pop it back in the mouth, it'll taste minty. There's no mint in icing sugar. How does that happen? So there you're getting an enhancement effect, maybe even a changing of the threshold for detection of mint, but you're getting it resurging once you get the sugar combination with it. So it goes in both directions, these taste-smell interactions. So there's a lot of interaction between taste and smell that's going to make it difficult to isolate, especially when it's retronasal olfaction, to isolate smell by itself. So can we study smell in isolation? Well, that's based on this really rather outmoded and utterly false view of our senses, which we've worked with since Aristotle, I mean, Aristotle told us that there were 5 elements that made up the world, and we've given that up, but somehow we still believe he was right about the senses. 5 senses, absolutely. They're all distinct. Why? It's a very funny idea. It seems to be based on, I don't actually know what it's based on, but we think it's based on an understanding of our own experience. And so our own experience presents us with these distinct parcels of tastes and smells and touches and sounds and so on. But right now, you're getting a simultaneity of experiences. You can feel the seat under you. You can maybe feel the sensation if you're rubbing your hands together or your fingers together or touching your face. There's the ambient smells of the room. There's the sound of my voice, and maybe you're looking at me or you're asleep, in which case, just continue. So I'll speak softer. So you don't actually get your experience parceled up into these distinct parts. You've got this unified, simultaneous happening. So why do we think that the senses are actually so isolated? And we used to even trace it back in psychology to, look, this is where in the brain they're happening separately. There's touch. If we look at the motor areas and the somatosensory cortex up there, and we look at the primary taste cortex, the auditory cortex, vision at the back, it's all nice and separated out. But we now know there's a huge amount of activity that's happening, and interactivity that's happening between the areas. It's not so easy to parcel it out. So there's a fusing of the senses, and there are far more than 5. If you ask neuroscientists how many senses have we got these days, it's anywhere between 22 and 33. I mean, it's really, 5. Why 5? There are rules of combining, of how they combine, and we'll talk a bit about this. Sensory dominance, spatial-temporal unities, and semantic congruence. We'll get to that by and by. So we should give up what you might call the balkanization of the senses. You really don't want to start, parceling them up and dividing them. You want to study the way they're merging and the way they're working together. I mean, it's interesting that philosophers have always thought they're defending common sense, but they actually might be sort of dictating to common sense here, saying that they're separate. And psychologists, because we studied these things in isolation. We studied them separately. Now, given that I've said smell interacts with taste, smell doesn't just interact with taste. Smell interacts with touch. Did you know there are aromas in shampoo that make your hair feel softer? That green apple aroma that's in so many shampoos actually sensitizes the fingers. And so when you're running your hands through your hair and you say, oh, it's beautifully soft, it's actually created or enhanced by aroma. And it's not just in the hair or in the fingertips, you get that in the mouth too. So when you have certain aromas happening simultaneously with something you're eating, you can make what you're eating taste creamier. We know this from decades of research on low-fat yogurts. There's a huge amount of really good sensory science goes on in low-fat yogurt. So of course what happened was they said, okay, let's take all of the fat out of the yogurt, and then it was watery and people didn't like it, so they put emulsifying glue, and then people said it's gluey and they didn't like it. And then they thought, how do we get it to be as desirable, even though it's got less fat and it's healthier for us? Well, one of the ways you can do it, there are a few tricks, and some of them are secret behind doors, but one of the tricks is if you have certain aromas, just like with the shampoo, it can make what's in your mouth taste creamier. And notice that when something tastes creamy, it also tastes sweeter. Something that's smooth and creamy, double cream, people say it tastes sweet. There's no sugar in it at all. So you have these interactions between the senses to give you something. What else? Well, how about smell and sounds? Notice how you're all perfectly happy. Was it just metaphor to talk about high notes and low notes? And in fact, if you give people odors and then ask them to listen to pieces of music, they're perfectly willing to say, yes, that goes with this, here's a high note, that goes with this minty aroma, here's a low note, that goes with that musky smell. They're very happy to do that. Now, it could be that these are just mere associations, what's called cross-modal correspondences. So a lot of work done by Charles Spence and Ophelia Derrois have looked at these combinations, and we know that bitter notes on the tongue are associated with low notes, played on brass instruments are particularly good, and sour or sweet high notes are associated with high notes like a tinkling piano. This is so effective that there's a very creative artist chef called Caroline Hopkinson who had a pop-up restaurant in London, House of Wolf recently, working with Charles Spence as a collaborator. And what you got was a bittersweet toffee pudding, and beside your toffee pudding there were 2 phone numbers, and you took your mobile phone, because people in restaurants always take out their mobile phone, and you dial one number and you listen to a sound and the pudding tastes sweet. You dial the other number and you listen to the sound and the pudding tastes bitter. Now I know this works because Charles and I did an experiment in London where we had some bittersweet toffee that Heston Blumenthal had made, and you gave it to the audience and then you said, okay, I want you to chew this. Now we're going to play you these sounds, and we had and people said, that's amazing, how did he get the toffee to change flavour, you know, to go with the sounds? No, he's not that clever. He's very good, he's not that good. So you can modify what people taste. Now, can you do that with smell? Don't know, but given that we're talking about flavours and we don't want to separate tastes from flavours, maybe sounds can actually have a contribution to make to smells, to olfaction. Now, these cross-modal correspondences are based on some very familiar work. It was done a long time ago in the 30s and then revived by Ramachandran. 2 shapes, which one's booba, which one's kiki? Got it? It's universal except for the himba, who don't do this, bugger. But everybody else does, and what's more, it generalizes, and it generalizes very well. If I said to you fizzy or still water, which one is booba, which one's kiki? So I say, which water is kiki? Fizzy, right, everyone says fizzy. And you can then give people clues, and that's how advertisers work, because they can give people the right clues. So in coffee shops, which is bitter, you can have things like this, and Costa Coffee has this, and if you ever see a San Pellegrino bottle, the one for the sparkling water, it's got a red star on the top, it's got a red star on the label. It's giving you the right associations for, this is kiki, this isn't booba. It's also green, which is a colour representing sourness and sort of bitterness, and it's a clear bottle for the still water. So these things are working to maybe create and partly constitute the flavours we're getting. Here's a universal one. I love this. If I made you put lemons on a scale between fast and slow, where would lemons be? Fast. Banana? Slow. Okay, that's universal. So who knows why? We've no idea why. So we're wired this way to have these associations. So maybe these are just associations, but they're powerful enough perhaps to change our experiences. So let's go back to real interactions, not just associations. There's an interaction, we said, between touch and smell, between smell and taste, and there's also an interaction between smell and the trigeminal component. The trigeminal is a completely different way of detecting odors. It's not smell. It's not a smell. It's got different receptors. So where you've got trigeminal stimulation of the trigeminal receptors, and there are 2 different kinds, well, there are more, but there's 2 different very broad kinds of them. Of course, it's the trigeminal that makes mustard taste hot and peppermint taste cool in your mouth, even though there's no change of temperature. And when you have too much wasabi, where do you feel it? Yeah, you don't feel it in the mouth. You won't feel it in the mouth, you feel it in the nose. Okay. Very different from capsaicin, by the way. Chilies do both, give you the pain in the nose and have local oral burning, so they're particularly nasty. But rioja quenches them, it's very good. Sweetness and enhances sourness, which is why Coca-Cola and Sprite and all those drinks are carbonated, because they're delivering unpalatable amounts of sugar to people. If you ever let them go flat, it's undrinkable. But if you carbonate it, boy, you can take a huge amount of sugar in. They're a very evil delivery mechanism. I mean, it's really there to get you to just have this huge amount of sugar intake. I keep saying this on camera. Whoever it is that decided that, but right, don't sue me. I'm doing science here. Right, so, but here's an interesting thing about the trigeminal. The trigeminal will give you a sense that you're detecting odors. It will give you how powerful an odor is. So think of very strong alcohols. You've got a brandy or a cognac, you put it to your nose and it's very powerful. When we're testing whether people have lost their sense of smell, and sadly all of us in our older years, should we live so long, we'll start having a diminution of our sense of smell, you can still get trigeminal detection. And of course, that's one of the things that people try to use to fool doctors. If elderly people are slightly embarrassed, they don't want to say they've lost their sense of smell, they're often using trigeminal signals to say, yes, I can smell things. And a very good clinician I know in Lausanne has this nice test. So she gives people a black glass with some cognac in it. And she says, tell me what this is like. And they smell it and they say, oh, disgusting. And she knows they can't smell because they're getting none of those fruit, caramel notes, right? They're just getting the powerful hit of the alcohol nipping the nose. So we know these two dissociate, but usually they go together. Smell and vision. So let's go back to this idea of multisensory combination. There are rules of dominance, and the rules of dominance are interesting because of this well-known but utterly misquoted and shamefully misreported experiment, famous experiment by Gilles Moreau, Frédéric Brochet and Denis Duverdieu. And they did this experiment, which everybody knows and gets wrong, where they gave people, experts, they gave them white wines and red wines and got them to describe them. And a week later, they brought them back and gave them white wines and red wines to describe, experts and novices, except the red wines were in fact the last week's white wines with flavorless, odorless red dye in them to make them look like red wines. And of course, they find that the experts are using red wine descriptors, the berries, you know, the cherries, the strawberry, the leather, and the tobacco, blah, blah, blah. Now, people say, oh, so that shows that wine tasting is a lot of nonsense, forgetting that it was just a smell experiment. They couldn't get it past the ethics committee to let them taste it. They were smelling those wines. Should we be surprised that vision dominates olfaction? No. It does dominate audition. If you've got a conflict between sensory signals, vision is pretty powerful, and you'll often trust your eyes more than you'll trust some of the other senses, unless vision is somehow diminished by lighting or blurry vision or whatever. So all that you're getting is that when you see something that looks red, you've got an expectation it's going to be red, and you're searching for things, and it might mean that the expectation setting is actually conflicting with the olfactory signals and giving you a resolved product. So quote this right, people. I mean, they deserve it, and stop the rot. Okay. So smell, I also want to agree with Kane. I think smell is perceptual. It's not merely sensory. It's not just about having sensations that tell us about us and about nothing else. It represents the qualities of an effusion or their source. And it is, in some sense, spatial. I think it's spatial in all sorts of interesting ways, but perhaps different, as we talked about, from vision and audition. Nice spatial sense that Cathy Farkas mentioned, I think, at a talk that we were both at, Peppa. Very nice sense in which she points out that although we don't normally get very good directional sense, you do get a sense of distance, how far or how near. Is the person smoking in the room or at the next table, or are they a little further away? Is the person wearing perfume very nearby and farther away? You do have a sort of spatial sensitivity there to distance in smell. It's a very nice observation. Also, there are olfactory illusions. In fact, smell and taste clinics deal with them all the time. So people have illusions. That is when something doesn't smell the way it should smell. I had a woman write to me after I did a broadcast on the BBC about loss of smell, and she told me she first discovered that she had a problem with her olfaction when she threw out some orange juice because it smelt of fish. Threw it away, and then she started making herself some coffee, and then the coffee tasted of fish, and then she tried other liquids, and it was all tasting of fish, and she thought, smelling of fish and therefore tasting of fish, and she thought, this poor woman has got a very interesting compensatory strategy because it stopped her from eating for a while because she found everything disgusting. So what she now does, very clever move, every morning she has smoked salmon, And when she drinks her coffee, she can believe that the lingering taste of the smoked salmon is still in her mouth when she's drinking the coffee, so the coffee's no longer disgusting. It's a good coping strategy. So you can have illusions. You can have things smelling wrong. You can also have hallucinations. You can have phantosmia, where you suddenly have a bright blast of a smell, and you might even look around to see where it is, and there's no source for it. So this is just brain generated. These kinds of things, when they occur, are usually signs of neurodegenerative disease, if that happens. And so, if anybody gets them, you should go and have it checked out. It's not fun. Another thing that Ophelia Derwa pointed out to me, and I think again it's a good observation about the chance for having objectivity, and if any of you have waded through Tyler Burge's mighty volume recently, you'll know that Tyler says a sensory system counts as a perceptual system when it has constancies, when it recognizes perceptual constancies, just as the visual system does for colors and so on. Well, I think there are constancies in smell, and this is Ophelia Derwa said, look, you have to pause between sniffing. It's not just continuous going on. You breathe in and you breathe out, or you die, right? But you say that smell is still here, and you might even be moving around. It might be changing its intensity, but that smell, between those gaps, it's like long blinking. When you're breathing out, breathing in, there are gaps, but there's a constancy. I think that's right. So I think there are reasons to try and build up a kind of sense of smell as objective and giving some spatial information. Smell is always with us, apart from with Marta, so sorry, but smell is always with us, even, and I think for anosmics, we really haven't got all the research in here, but smell is with us even when we're not aware of it. So there's an enormous amount of sub-awareness that's very influential about smell, where people don't think they're getting smell. For example, most of you don't really recognize the smell of your own home until you've been away for a long time and come back, and then it kind of strikes you. But you go into your own home, but something is happening. There is an identification of it, because it's giving you a reassurance that that's a familiar place. And it's one of the things that people who have sudden loss of smell talk about, is the feeling of alienation from their surroundings. Things are not familiar. Buildings, people, places they go are just now not giving them that reassurance. So this is happening at a level outside consciousness, below consciousness, but it's having an effect on consciousness, very powerful effect. Chemical signaling, we do a lot of chemical signaling, which doesn't mean we have pheromones. There's a big debate about this, but I'm with Thomas Hummel. He says you've got the residual ducts of pheromones here, and they don't project to the brain. So what are they doing? Magic? I mean, it's not happening, folks. We know that women in close proximity, living together, will suddenly find their menstrual cycles getting into sync with one another. They start to coordinate, and the synchrony seems to come from chemical smell detection, even though they're not aware of it. Recognition of kin, nice work by Denise Chen and colleagues, where you get t-shirts that are worn by people not wearing any other body scents, and they wear them for a day or two, and then you've got all these t-shirts and you put them in little canisters, and you get a bunch of people in and you say to them, okay, I want you to smell your way through all these canisters and say which ones are of people related to you. And the subjects say, get out of here, I can't do that. And they say, look, just guess, forced choice, guess. They're incredibly good at this. They get up beyond 70% of this. This is good. So we are a lot of chemical signaling, a lot of this is going on, and sexual selection. It seems as though we choose mates. Somebody's sense of smell is very important. There might be somebody you find very attractive, but if the smell's wrong, if it doesn't work, nothing you can do. It's really sad. No good. And now there's a very nice paper suggesting that we actually pick out people whose smell is an indication that their genes are far enough away from us that they'll be successful mates to breed with, and there's no danger attached to it. So there's very nice chemical signaling. And we know also there's an effect on mood. So we know that lemon and lavender are odors that people like if they're in buildings, even though people don't detect that they're there, they're having an effect. There's a bank called Helm in Colombia who do sensory marketing and involved Lindstrom and others to do some of this work for them. And they have a lot of odors in the bank, and people just say, oh, it's a really nice bank, it's, you know, it's really sort of funky and modern and new. But the odors are carefully picked. When you have lemon, that you should have that in the morning. That picks people up and makes them alert and awake, zippy. And lavender calms them, you know, more of an evening smell. But if you had dimethyl sulfide, which is really aversive, you know, in your environment, people will find the place unpleasant, even though they're not necessarily registering that it was the smell that did that to them. So, what about odor detection in consciousness? Once we get above threshold level, once we're actually, you know, talking about our experience, well, I think just as with the blind, there are cases and cases. You can't make conclusions. We've been very, very simplistic. Another reason for being simplistic about treating the senses as though they could be studied in isolation is because we think patterns of loss are very clear. You lose your sight, you lose your smell, you lose your hearing, as though it all goes. Now, even if you've lost all of your sight, and it takes a lot to do that. I mean, even the people we call blind have often got shape information, they've got you know, light and dark and so on. Really makes a difference whether they were congenitally blind, late blind, early blind, and so on. You can get very big differences as to what else is going on in the cortex and what other systems are working in tandem with them. So we should think about that with anosmia too. Congenital or late acquired or early. And of course, as I said, there's a whole range of conditions. There's hyposmia, a kind of lack of smells, not entirely gone, but very low and not much detection. There's hypernosmia, where smells are just blaring and they're horrible, they're too powerful, things are rather offensive to you. And then the cases we talked about before. Now, it's not always clinical, and I think this was mentioned earlier today as well, is that all of us have got, I mean, you mentioned having a specific anosmia where you couldn't get the cleaning smell everybody was complaining about. There are lots, most of us have a specific anosmia of some sort. There are things we just can't detect. My favorite teasing is with Charles Spence, who, although he and I work on flavor perception, he can't detect TCA, trichloroanisole, which is corked wine. This is one of the most volatile things that we can smell. We can detect 1 part in a trillion. That's how volatile it is, and he doesn't get it at all. So you can have a horribly corked wine, you can put it down in front of him, and you can put a real one and say which one's corked, and he's at chance. So, you know, it's great. You just give him all your corked bottles. I tend to think that's because he had an Oxford training, and I think a lot of Oxford philosophers are just brought up, and psychologists are just brought up on bad wines, badly stored wines. But anyway, so notice there could be a specific pleasure in having a specific anosmia. You could have the corked wine and it doesn't bother you at all, whereas other people find it aversive. What about ambiguous odors? Again, we are very simplistic. We think you can detect an odor or you can't detect an odor, but there are ambiguous odors. Isovaleric acid is a great one. If you give people isovaleric acid to smell and you tell them it's vomit, they find it disgusting. If you give it to them and tell them it's Parmesan, they find it quite nice. Parmesan smells of vomit, try it. I mean, it really does. Once you've got that, you realize, you know, it's quite hard to go back. So your recognition, your detection and recognition of odors, and your hedonic reaction to them might be very context specific. And of course, a lot of recognition in the brain is context sensitive. Faces are context sensitive. You have the habit of not recognizing people when they're out of context. It's somebody you meet in a particular context, you see them somewhere else, you might think vaguely familiar, but you just don't get it. And in fact, I was at a nice talk yesterday where Vicky Bruce mentioned that part of what it takes to recognize a face is the mutual recognition, the fact that the other person responds. And you can do this nice work where people were sent to places where their parents were having holidays and told to linger outside, and when the parents came out and they went, oh, the person just sort of blanks them like this, and they say, oh no, it's not her, and it's their own daughter. So it's interesting. It's very, very context sensitive. Now, notice that you've changed the hedonics rather nicely. You can, depending on the description, whether you describe it as vomit or Parmesan, you can change the hedonics. You'll get one or the other. And also, when we talk about the hedonics of smell, again, we need to ask, Which smell? Now, Paul Rosen, beautiful work, he was the one who first kind of got us on to these two senses of smell and why we have two senses of smell. But they give rise to two types of pleasure, and I think this was his real point. He had many things to say, but I think this is the way we should tell it. The pleasure of inhaling is associated with the pleasure of anticipation. The pleasure of exhaling, when you get the odors coming from the mouth to the nose, that's the pleasure of reward. And they mismatch on occasion. So here's some famous matches, mismatches, and so on. Think of a smelly cheese, like a poisse, and you probably have some stinkers here too, Catalan cheeses. Okay, so you know, you smell it, you think, oh, it smells like a teenager's training shoe. Wow, I don't want that. And then you pop it in your mouth, it's delicious. So that's where you're getting the same odors are passing externally to the nose or internally from the mouth, treated differently. Now the other one, which I particularly like reminding people of, because they all go, oh yeah, is coffee. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, isn't it great? But aren't you also just a little disappointed with the taste of it? It's just never as good as the smell. You smell a freshly brewed coffee and then you try it, it's like, yeah. Now people go chasing the dragon here. They're kind of like, they change their kitchen, they get, you know, better pressure, they get the latest, you know, machine, you know, they buy beans that have been sourced from a Colombian mountain, you know, carried by goat, excreted through the wolf's belly and so on. And they'll still never get it. They'll never get it because there's a mismatch between the volatile, the airborne volatiles of coffee coming in and the ones that are reaching the same receptors through the nose from the mouth. That's why they say wake up and smell the coffee. They don't say wake up and taste it. They know, the advertising guys know this, right? Now there's one food which has got exactly the same identification pattern coming in and as it were, moving from the mouth going out, and they match, and that's chocolate, which is another reason why it's a wonder food. The brain expects and the brain gets, and then it's very happy. It's like, oh, this is good, you know, whoa, give me more of that. So there's a tremendously important thing going on here. Different kinds of pleasures, different kinds of hedonics. And I think the hedonics of smell are worth looking at. If you're going to do the aesthetics of olfaction, I think you need to pay attention to all the variety and subtlety here, because there's interesting stuff here. And we haven't thought about it until the science, as it were, brought a lot of this to our attention. Some of it's anthropology bringing it to our attention too. So what makes something smell good? Is it just the chemistry? Do you say, well, there are some molecules that just smell great? There's something called isosuper that perfumers always use when everything else goes wrong, and they just bang some isosuper in there because it just makes everything smell lovely. And they say, this is a kind of get out of jail card, it's a quick fix. I have a bottle of this in my office to let people smell, and it's like, whoa, magic. So sometimes it might be about the molecules, but it's not just the molecules themselves, because the very same odor at different intensities can take on, different concentrations can take on quite different profiles. So in wine, when you get geraniol, you get it at low concentrations and you get a kind of pineapple smell. Slightly higher, you get that grapefruit, it's a terpene, you get the grapefruit. You go any higher and it gets fecal and rather nasty. Okay? So it's not just the molecules themselves. There's also something interesting about changes without underlying differences. Have you noticed that there are smells of the body which we might find disgusting, but in an erotic context they can sometimes flip and become exciting and desirable. So there's a kind of interesting flip here depending on other things in the zone. Now, hedonics is also mixed because people tend to think with flavors and perhaps with smells that this is a good smell or this is a good taste. You know, chocolate is good. Remember, chocolate you don't get just from the tongue because you're not going to identify it just from the tongue alone. You're going to need smell in there. But it's not as though the hedonic value is wedded and welded to it inseparably. Because I can easily change your hedonics in the following very simple experiment. So I give Peppa a piece of chocolate, she's very happy. I give another piece of chocolate, she's very happy. I keep doing this, and she says, oh, I'm good with the chocolate. So, the experiment must continue. Sort of Milgram-like, and then you've got to have it, and I have it. And she thinks, oh, no. And I keep giving it. And now she finds the chocolate disgusting. I mean, the hedonics just start to tail right off. But she can still identify it's the same. If I gave her different chocolate, she'd notice straight away. It's that chocolate, so the identity is good, but the hedonics are changing, right? The identities are still in place. Now, so you get this thing that's called stimulus-specific satiety. Because notice it's not that she's full, it's not that she couldn't eat anything else. I say, well, how about a bit of cheese instead? Oh, what a relief. Yes, I'll have some cheese, great. Give me that smelly cheese, I love that, that's good. All right. So, we know that smells, we also know that certain smells go with tastes well. So you can do these lovely experiments where you're actually pumping aroma up to the olfactory epithelium as if retronasally from just behind the soft palate there. And if you give somebody a saltiness in the mouth, but you give them a sweet smell like strawberry, the whole thing is disgusting. And in fact, it doesn't quite make a flavor. To get to be a flavor, for it to kind of bind together, it's got to be congruent. So you need sugar in the mouth and the strawberry aroma, or you need chicken aroma and salt. If you have chicken and sweetness, again, no good. You also know that you've got sounds. We said tinkling piano for sweet smelling things. We've also got hedonic responses to the congruence. If you've got congruence, the brain likes that and thinks it's very good. So it's not just the smell by itself and in isolation, it's how it pairs with other things. Now what about, oh, and I should mention, sorry, I meant to mention, so we went past. I told you that vanilla has a sweetness enhancing effect, but it's culturally specific. Not for the Japanese, it doesn't. The Japanese would smell vanilla and think it smells salty, because they don't combine vanilla as we do with ice cream, with biscuits, custard, cake. They put it with salt and fish, right? So for them it's salty. And I solved a problem, I think, for Diageo, with whom I'm doing a bit of consulting. They said that the Japanese customers always say of the whiskies, oh, we love that saline flavor, we like that salty flavor. And they're thinking, there's no salt in this, what are we talking about? I said, it's the vanilla from the barrels. So Westerners will smell this and think, oh, lovely, kind of butterscotch, sweet honey and so on. They'll smell it, they'll get a salt reaction, and then they'll think coastal whiskies, and the association's made. So some things are about the particular combinations that you've put together. That's what makes congruence for you. Congruence is not, as it were, necessarily just made in nature. It might be made through training, perceptual learning and training. Now blends, I'm interested in blends. That's why I'm working for Diageo at the moment. But I'm interested in blends because blends are very interesting. Think of champagnes, which are blends. Think of perfumes, which are blends. Think of tea blends. Think of whiskey blends. Well, wines are often blends. Even if it's a single grape, they have vinified parcels separately, and then they mix them to see which one produces the best wine. Here's an interesting fact about our detection system. We can recognize that something is a more complex drink or perfume, a more complex smell, even though we can't tell what the parts are. We can sometimes, take two wines, this is simple, this is complex, and yet you can't break it down any further. That's very interesting. Where does the detection of complexity go on? Maybe below threshold, or maybe in temporal dynamics of things changing. And I think that's maybe the clue to it, that subpersonally or subconsciously, you're getting many things that are happening one after the other in a sequence, because there's a temporal dynamics, both the tasting and smelling. When you smell a complex smell, it's like a musical line. There's sort of how it begins, where it goes, and where it finishes. And people are very good if you ask them to kind of draw with their fingers. They're actually quite consistent. Oh yeah, that's very much like that, or it's like that, or this is sort of. They do cross-modal associations very, very quickly to describe what they think is going on. And yet, can't necessarily pick out the parts. So there's a sort of recognition that complexity is a property of quality and high hedonics quite often, but without really understanding what the component parts might be. And very often it's contrastive. There's a unity, but there seems to be things that you're having to contrast. I want to just end by talking about that case. With every pleasure, it might be enhanced with a little admixture of pain. A bit of sadness with your joy, we just kind of give it something special here. A lot of art plays on that, of course. So there are pleasant and unpleasant components in some of the mixtures we really like. And perfumers know this, and winemakers don't, I think, but it's probably important that they do. Here's the nice study done by Horst and Ed Rolls and his team. Work done in Oxford. If you have natural jasmine as a smell that we know people like, it was talked about earlier, you go around, you smell jasmine, we like that. It has about 2 or 3% of a very aversive chemical in it called indole. And if you give people indole by itself, it's, it really is unpleasant. It's sort of head turning, you don't like it. Perfumers trying to make artificial jasmine, not using the natural materials, but just trying to make artificial jasmine. They can do that because they take the key aromas, the ones that are good enough that we give us those, we'll recreate in our mind, yeah, that's jasmine. So they can do it, and they can leave indole out. Now, if you give two samples to people, and they're very well made samples, they will not necessarily be able to tell them apart, or they'll not be very good at discriminating, but if you ask, well, which one do you prefer? They prefer the one with the indole. Interesting. So it might be that they need something, a little unpleasant to contrast and pique the pleasure of what's in there. That actually the contrastive effect is part of the hedonics here. I think that very well might be what's going on, and maybe there's quite a lot of that in the hedonics of smell. Oh. I mean, the key aromas point is great. If you haven't tried this, I recommend it. Get somebody to smell some lemon on a fragrance stick. Smell some lemon, and then get them to smell some cinnamon, right? And then get them to smell, so that you're going to give them lemon, you're going to give them cinnamon, and then you're going to give them cherry. And then you wave it under their nose. What do they smell? Coca-Cola. It's just, vanilla. Vanilla's good in there too. Vanilla, cherry, cinnamon, and lemon. And you can do them all individually. And then when you put the sticks together and go, what's that? They go, oh, that's Coca-Cola. So notice you haven't nearly as many molecules going on there or odors in there, but it's enough to give you a reconstruction. It's a good enough map to kind of pick out what you want. But it could be much better as Coke when you have some of the things in that might be a little aversive as well in there. And of course, huge amounts of sugar, so you need the carbonation. All right, so summing up, olfactory aesthetics, if we're going to do it, I think one has to be very careful not to think that you're going to get at olfaction by itself. And even if you did have the temptation to think, I'm just looking at smell, you ought to ask which smell, given that it's not so easy to divide from retronasal and orthonasal. A lot of your experience is multisensory. We almost never do we have an experience in a single modality with everything else still. To set that up would be very tricky. I mean, huge experimental labor, how would we do it? There's context sensitivity, as I said. It's not as though some odors are just, as it were, pleasant all the time. Depends on the context. And even detection of them depends on context as to whether you get them right or not. The contrastive effect is very important. So again, it's not necessarily just find the nice ones. The variability between people and within people across times and depending on saturation points matters. It's got to be true that we can change our hedonics for smells, because otherwise we couldn't acquire tastes. There were things you didn't like and now you do, especially with foods and drinks. So how did you do that unless you actually changed the hedonics? It's probably got the same taste. Now, philosophers make a real muddle of this because they love this stuff and they say, oh, you know, very famous paper by Dan Dennett where he's got Sanborn and what's the other guy called? Two tasters of Maxwell House. And the two tasters of Maxwell House have always enjoyed their job. They're tasting the coffee, they're loving it. And then one day, one of them comes in and says, you know, Maxwell House no longer tastes the same. It used to be great, but it's, you know, it just doesn't have the same. It somehow changed. And the other says, well, how do you know it doesn't taste exactly the same and it's you that's changed? You know, you're not experiencing it the same, or you've lost your pleasure in it. And Dennett, of course, wants to argue there's no way to choose between these two. Now, you can see the paradox. The paradox is philosophically very interesting. So the idea is, if the flavor hasn't changed, but the hedonics have, what explains the difference? Does the hedonics not supervene on the flavor, right? On the other hand, if, because the hedonics have changed, it's going to be that the flavor is different. Because the hedonics have changed, you could never really acquire a taste. You've just got a taste for something else, which isn't the way it tasted when you didn't like it. It's got a new taste for you. I think we don't have this dilemma at all, because I think you do have an explanation as to why the hedonics have changed, even though the flavor is exactly the same. It's because your experience of it, your way of experiencing and sometimes thinking about it has changed. Now you might say, oh, well, if my experience of it has changed, then the flavor has changed. No, because that's because you're identifying flavor with your experience of it as though it's just a matter of sensations. As long as you've got flavors as objective, you can actually say that you can now approach them differently and experience them differently, and that might be what changes the hedonics. It's a longer story, but just to hint at it. Congruence, we talked about. Congruence is important for hedonics, so it's not, again, just the smell by itself, but it's going to be when that smell goes with the right color, goes with the right sound. And I wish gallery, I mean, I'm preaching to someone who's already converted, but I wish, you know, people in galleries would get this. We tend to think that art is just sort of unisensory. You know, you go and look at a painting, or you just go and sort of, you know, touch the sculpture. It's always multisensory. So, I mean, you've got to make sure that the things are combining in the right way so that it's enhancing the experience, or, you know, it's setting it off, which might even include the labels and descriptions of the work, as we said. Some of you weren't at my table at lunch, so I'll just mention this example. Expectations by Label Matter, nice piece of work by Martin Yeomans in Sussex and Heston Blumenthal. Blumenthal made a smoked salmon ice cream, and he gave it to two groups. One group are told, here's a new ice cream flavor, describe it, how good is it, how much do you like it, how creamy is it, salty, sweet. The other are told it's a frozen savory mousse. No prizes for guessing who likes it, who doesn't. Right? But more surprisingly, the people who were told it was an ice cream rate it as saltier than the people who are told it's a savoury mousse. So expectations can have a really quite powerful effect on what's actually happening in the mouth. And then finally, those congruences might be universal, some of them are, and then some of them might be culturally specific. So we might live in different smell worlds, and we should be aware of those individual differences and cultural differences, especially if we're doing the aesthetics of it in a museum where we've got lots of people coming through the door with very different expectations. If you had vanilla to get a particular experience for Westerners, it's not going to be like that for the Japanese. You have to know that. And then finally, and this is for Marta, are these aesthetics replaceable in some sense? Well, the question is whether constructing some trigeminal stimulation that's not too strong, but it's there, with some properties of sensation, somatosensory or oral sensations, with also some tastants, are going to at least combine to give you something multisensory and complex, which will actually be rather good and enjoyed. And you must have by yourself done the experimenting to find out which things you enjoyed. And now there are lots and lots of people reporting that they've lost their sense of smell, either through head injury or through deterioration with age or neurodegenerative disease. And with an elderly population, we're going to have to think of ways of giving people satisfactory experiences. And we're going to have to replace what was the hedonics that was given largely by the smell in combination with other things. So we need to make new combinations, leaving smell out, but try to achieve the sort of hedonics that will get people to eat and enjoy and prefer. And that's a big challenge. It won't be the same, but I think it will remind you that smell is so important to your sense of well-being, to your desire to eat, to your feeling of security and safety in the places that you visit. And so if we lose it late, we do much worse than people who are congenitally anosmic if we lose it. And we may have to do something for them, and we may have to do it fast, given the age profile of the people we live amongst. Thank you.
Yeah, I've just got a question about what you said about the Maxwell House sort of tasting paradox.
Yeah.
And so your resolution of the paradox is to, trying to decide what's changed, you or the stuff, is to invoke the objectivity of flavor.
Yeah.
And so you say, well, the flavor remains the same, but your experience of it is different.
Yeah.
Is that right? I was just wondering how that fit with the overall view of flavor you've kind of sketched, because I understood that given the role that context and congruence and these things play in your experience of flavor, that I'm not. I mean, I don't see how the paradox is so easily resolved, because it seems that flavor is also a construction still of your experience in all of these ways. No,
I don't want it to be a construction of your experience at all.
Right.
Remember, congruency and so on will help you have aesthetic experiences. That's not the same thing. That's about the hedonics and the aesthetics. That's not the same thing as flavors. I'm objectivist about flavors, and I think the experiences we have in eating, the overall experience of eating overflows flavor. It's got many other things going on. Okay. So when you have a crispy apple, the crunching sound of it is enhancing the whole experience. It's not part of the flavor for me.
Okay.
You could mess about with people, and Charles Spencer's done that, and you have headphones on them, and if they're chewing gum every time they chew, they get a crunching sound. They find that very disruptive, and they don't want to go on eating. But I don't think it's going to interfere with their ability to detect flavor. A lot of psychologists and neuroscientists still don't get the distinction between flavor and flavor perception, like color and color perception. They just say flavor perception happens when the brain combines all these sensory signals modulated by context and congruence and so on, and therefore it's a construct of the brain. Now, that's what flavor perception is. Tracking flavors and having constancies for flavors is harder, especially with wine, as you know, because a wine is evolving and changing. And your job, by having snapshots of it at different times, is to work out where it is on its trajectory and where it'll go next, where it's been and where it'll go. And when you're sufficiently skilled to be able to do that with a reasonable amount of confidence, you can confirm your prediction. You can say, yes, it did open out. Yes, it was an hour longer in the glass or another couple of years in the bottle. Yes, it developed these properties. So finding a flavor profile is a matter of having these snapshots and then trying to figure out what's constant in the background. So I think as long as you've got the idea of a flavor of that sort independent of you, you can say, does the thing you didn't like and now you like it, acquire a taste for it, does it taste the way it did to you then? I think it tastes the same way. I think you don't taste it the same way.
Yeah.
Right? And I think conflating those is what makes it look as though either it tastes different and that's why you like it, but now it's not, you couldn't have acquired the original taste, or you say it tastes the same way, so how come you like it? There's no explanation, because it's exactly the same taste. You can do better if you have the distinction I have between flavor perception and flavor.
I mean, that's quite, just to follow up quickly, that's quite interesting, because it means that a lot of people are going to be quite wrong about their own phenomenology of experiencing these things.
Oh, all the time.
And you really have to learn to track flavor as an independent property.
Yeah. You have to,
it's
a Cartesian legacy still that we think we're absolutely accurate about our own experience. Descartes said, let's put everything we believe in doubt, let's suspend everything that we've previously taken for granted, except when it comes to your own experience. He just didn't go far enough. Why take your own experience to be kind of self-evident and presented to you in this self-illuminating way? We're massively wrong about our experiences.
Can I ask one? I just wanted to ask one quick question also about the Japanese and vanilla.
Yeah.
Because I didn't quite get it. So you said that it's through association that the Japanese have learned to taste vanilla as salty and pair it in certain ways, and we've learned to. But wouldn't the explanation go the other way around? I mean, the reason that we use vanilla to sweeten things is that we perceive it as sweetness enhancing. And then why is there a difference between us and the Japanese? Is it physiological or cultural in some other way? Or I just wasn't sure.
No, I don't think that's right. I mean,
okay.
I think people try out combinations of things, and they work. It's actually quite nice to combine vanilla salt with fish. It's good. It's good. It's not that it's so weird to us. It's just we don't do it pretty much. But when you do it, you say, oh, wow, that's a different flavor for me. But that they did not combine it with sweet dishes meant that you didn't have that brain-made association that gets you from the onset of detecting vanilla aroma to raising the activity of your sweet receptors, so that you now get the sweetness enhancement effect. They don't get that. They get saltiness. It's interesting. I met a woman in London at one of these smell events who had been. She was Japanese, but she'd been living here for 5 years, or living in London for 5 years. And I said, "What do you get?" She said, "I first get salt, then I get sweet." Nice.
I have a question, Barry, for you, which I think maybe comes back to Kane's talk. I was wondering whether you've given him some argument for supporting the view that olfactory experiences are representational, because you do talk about olfactory illusions, right? So I want to press you on that, because I was also talking to Laura. She's here, and she's a biologist. You weren't here yesterday, but she experimented with us, and it was all quite interesting. So I was talking to her, and like you, she also said, of course there are olfactory illusions. And she said pretty much what you said, that they tend to be sort of cognitive impairments of some sort. So they are signs of some kind of deterioration. So it seems to me that then philosophers and you guys are talking about two different things here, because when we talk about perceptual illusions in other areas, we're not talking about the system that is representing malfunctioning. I mean, the Müller-Lyer visual illusion is an illusion in which everything is working fine. I mean, we are perceiving the lines to be the same length or different lengths, different lengths, even though they are the same. So typically we talk about an illusion as a way of misrepresenting something when everything is working as it should. But in the case of olfactory experiences, you seem to be talking about illusions as what I will describe as malfunctioning. That's not a misrepresentation, right? That's just the system is malfunctioning.
I don't see why that makes any difference. Because I don't see why one couldn't say one wanted. I mean, I don't think malfunctioning, not malfunctioning, really, I don't think that matters. An illusion is going to be characterized by the input that's coming in, which under certain normal conditions leads to an experience that correctly portrays how the stimulus is not portraying how the stimulus is, and in fact is misrepresenting it as something else. Now,
but that's false.
Wait, hold on, a bit quick. You said something which one could just dig one's heels in and say that's just tendentious. You said, in the Müller-Lyer, the system's working perfectly well. One could say, no, it's not. It's not working perfectly well because it's showing you these two lines of the same length looking different. So it's not working perfectly well. But we say it's settled into that pattern, and we accept that malfunction because by and large it does a very good job elsewhere, it just doesn't do it here. So one could say there is where it's not working well. One could say that. And I just think that so that's why I don't think it's going to be very easy just to draw that distinction in the way you want it.
But at least you have to concede me that there is a mismatch.
Yeah.
If you're going to dig your heels in saying that everyone is malfunctioning when we perceive all of us, the Müller-Lyer illusion the way we do, then there is a mismatch between that way in which we are malfunctioning and the way in which these guys are malfunctioning, so that they had to be taken to the neurologist, right? I mean, luckily we don't have to go to the doctors.
No, luckily we don't, but let me give you the other case, which you might want to call an illusion. Is it an illusion when you were eating the chewing gum and the mint flavor disappears, and you take it out of the mouth and you roll it in icing sugar and you pop it back in and it's minty?
That's an illusion.
There you go. That'll do. And there's another one that Joanna...
That's why I was careful to...
Okay. But I mean, that's an illusion that happens when you're not needing to go to the... there's no deterioration. And there's a nice experiment, right? There's a nice experiment done by Joanne Hort and colleagues in Nottingham, where subjects are getting sucrose solution and isoamyl acetate odor, and that gives you a feeling you're experiencing the taste of banana. And they've got a little sort of device in their hand to say how intense. First of all, is it banana, is it apple? How intense of each of these is it? And they say banana, banana. And what they do is they go on like this and they drop the sugar off, so now you're getting water. And they say, it's not quite as banana as it was. And then they bring the sugar back on, and then they take the isoamyl acetate away. So roughly all you're getting is a sucrose solution. And they say, yeah, it's banana, but it's not as intense. That's an illusion.
That's a nice one. Yeah. No. I was just talking about these other cases.
Right.
Yeah. Marta.
Oh, so I should just before Marta starts. I mean, I should say that there is a question about whether the sweetness enhancement effect, that vanilla making things taste sweeter. I don't know whether to call that's just part of normal stuff, or that's like Müller-Lyer. I don't know. I mean, I think that's for philosophers to decide. It's not so the science is going to decide that. That's tricky.
No, I don't have anything. Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I don't have any intuitions.
Right.
I don't. I had the strong intuition with those cases, the cases in which, as it were, the falsity of the representation has as its origin some sort of
some damage.
Degenerative disease. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to draw. I mean, helpful if we can draw those distinctions. I'm not sure that you can get illusions even when you've got damage, and it might be the fact that you're now experiencing more illusions is why we should worry about you. So I mean, I still think you could say that. But it's fine for you if I just give you cases where there's no damage and they still seem to look the same way. Yeah, thank you. Marta.
Okay, mine is a very different question. We anosmics live in a world where stench does not exist. So nothing stinks, never. And I think this makes us think or feel that the world is a safer place and a cleaner place than it really is. And I think this has some relation with pain, because pain is a system that alerts you that there is some danger in your body, and this ability of olfaction to tell you here is a possible danger is in a way a similar function. And I ask myself if when you cannot smell and cannot feel the stench, this is perhaps in a sense you cannot feel a kind of pain or something similar. My question is, have you worked on that? Have you some intuitions about these things?
So I would like to, I think you should test her with very high trigeminal irritants to see if stench comes out. So a very nice man wrote to me, and he was the cause of the BBC doing a documentary or radio documentary about him from Madagascar, because he was talking about having lost his taste and then lost his smell and so on. I said, well, he can't have lost his taste and then his smell. I mean, he could still do sweet, sour, it's all there. And people, the interviewer said to him, oh, well, you must be saved all of those unpleasant things, like, walking past the fish market at the end of the day and getting that stench of rotting fish. And he said, oh, no, I still get that. And I was like, what? But of course, what he was getting was just trigeminal irritation. He couldn't do the odor identifications, but it was powerful and sort of irritating to him. So we could probably give you, as long as your trigeminal receptors are working, we would probably give you something like stench where it was unpleasant, and it will be a very good analogy to what we get, except we get the colours with it too, the odours with it. Very dangerous. I mean, the clean thing, there's an ironic thing about the cleanness of the world, because another woman wrote to me and said her husband lost his sense of smell and it was very dangerous. She had been cleaning cups, mugs to drink tea from, and she'd filled them full of bleach and left them, you know, left them on the side, and he went forward thinking it was water, and she screamed, "Don't!" Because, I mean, you know, he would have just been drinking this down because there was just no kind of warning. Again, I think bleach is pretty high trigeminal, so he's got more problems, I think, than just loss of smell. But yeah, so it was clean, but not in a good way. But I do want to know whether we could give you something like stench just by sort of the aversive.
I have had these experiences with artificial products that really make this feel of pain, but in normal life, this is more difficult to find.
Of course, of course. Yeah.
Jim.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much for a comprehensive and beautifully intricate model of aesthetics in everyday life. I'm wondering, how do you think this your olfactory aesthetics might apply to perfumers or chefs or, you know, more professional artists?
Well, chefs are really interested in this and are doing a lot and working with a lot of sensory scientists because they've kind of woken up to the idea that, you know, what they're giving the diner to give them a very good experience won't just be based on what's on the plate or what's going into their mouth. And in fact, we now know from this wonderful work that Charles Spence does, the shape of the plate matters, the weight of the cutlery matters, the color of the plate matters. You know, almost everything is going to have some kind of influencing effect. So if you want a dish, if you're working through a tasting menu and then there's the kind of dish that you think of as, you know, this is the real moment, how do you get people to sort of, after all these things, say, oh, and you know, you've got lots of wonderful restaurants and tasting menus here in Barcelona. Well, you can make the cutlery heavier. They won't notice, but they'll think, oh, now I'm getting something serious. You know, so chefs are interested and they're using this and they want to understand and they want to play with it. And I think that's quite creative. Perfumers, I think it's a little harder to get them engaged because they think they're controlling all the variables. And again, they think, I'm just doing this unisensory thing. No, you're not, because we're always multisensory. So the more they kind of look at the sensory science, the more I think they'll move on. And there are people now doing quite artistic things. You may have heard of I don't know if you've heard of her. She's in London, Lizzie Boscombe, who does this. Her stage name is Odette Toilette. And Odette does these fantastic shows and evenings where she gives people smells, but she created a project where she got writers to give a poem or a piece of writing to a perfumer, and the perfumer had to create a perfume that somehow went with that story. And then the other way around, she gave a specially created perfume to the writers, and they had to keep it for a month and then come up with something that was the story that went with that perfume. And it's fantastic as an experience when you hear someone reading something out and they pass this round, and you know, and some of them work better than others. Now, why do they work? You know, when people are describing, there was one that you know, was jazz nights in Tokyo. And you know, this was just the smell of this exotic stuff, and the descriptions of the dark and the neon and, you know, everything. I mean, it really made what you were smelling kind of just burst out with, you know, other images coming to mind. And I think the perfumers sort of see this. But I suppose that the problem is that when we smell, we do have lots of evoked memory. We know why, because you're directly, you know, projecting to the amygdala, getting this very fast, ancient response. It's not gated by the thalamus, blah, blah, blah. But you might have your own memory. We tried to do a little experiment with people where we were getting them to think about the sea, and then we're giving them the smell of the sea, and then giving them images of the sea. And people said, that's not the image of the sea I had when I smelt that. You know, my sea was different. So you've kind of got to let them recreate some other modalities and not lead them. But sounds might work. I mean, if you give people the sound of the sea and the smell of the sea, that works. And again, Heston Blumenthal did this. One of his signature dishes that he invented with Charles Spence is you've got a plate with some fish and some what looks like seaweed and a bit of, you know, foam, which looks like the wave coming on the shore. And when you get presented with this, you also get a conch shell, and you've got an iPod in it, and you're told to put the iPod, you know, into your ears, and it starts playing this lovely sound of the sea. And when you're hearing the sound of the sea while eating this, you just think this is the freshest fish, and you're actually sort of mentally projecting out there into the ocean as though you got it from there. So it's a very powerful effect. So it does seem to me that, you know, perfumers could do something in an art context if they think about involving other modalities, especially sound, I think.
Okay, yeah, Victor?
Thank you. Just a clarification question, because I didn't understand well what you said about Tyler Bart's theory of perception, in which, you know, visual perception will consist in the, I don't remember well, but the detection of invariances or invariant properties.
Not just invariances. It's not just invariances.
Not just invariances. No,
it's got to be the constancies. The constancies that he thinks we get at are representations of how that object is, even though it's not looking that way, and it's changing some of its appearance properties under different environmental settings. If it was just invariances, we can plug the invariances, but you wouldn't necessarily get representation and misrepresentation. So by constancy, he means something a little more.
Okay, so constancy. And how, I don't know, is it your view that you can apply the model to the olfactory experience, or that, so I don't know how the context sensitivity.
Right. Well, I think it's, I mean, yeah, I actually disagree with him a lot, because he doesn't think there's any constancy in olfaction, but equally he just takes vision as though vision worked by itself. And he says, look, you can get all the constancies you want just by the visual system. Sort of, but you know, you actually don't. I mean, here's the interesting thing. Philosophers have wasted a lot of ink and a lot of time by saying, you know, this is no good, it's got to be something opaque, by saying, oh, how is it that when we look at this, we don't just see, you know, one side of it, we see it as a complete object, even though we can't see the back. Do you know why we do? Because often we've got our hand around it, and we're seeing it and we're feeling it. I mean, and then we scale up. It's not so hard. So when you've got the multimodal working to pick out the objects, track them, interact with them by combining the senses, you've got way more constancies. You've got a chance of capturing way more constancies and tracking things in the environment much better. So this idea of trying to, it's like tying both your hands together and saying, oh, I can still move this much. You know, like the visual system can still get shaped just from, you know, detection of edge and so on. Yeah, up to a point, but that's not how we do it. So I just think that, you know, once you're putting all of the clues together, the brain is just saying, I'm taking in all this sensory information and I'm summing up and getting the best take I can of what's going on around me right now. And its job is to make that seem stable while everything else is moving. I mean, think of, they're chickens. If I learned this yesterday, if you pick up a chicken and you shake it, its eyes stay completely fixed on, you know, a point. It's got this vestibular ocular response, so its eyes stay fixed. And the chicken's eyes are really, its job is just to kind of stay fixed, as if then I'll see things moving. And of course we know that's true with the frog. If you've got flies dangling on a string, it's no good, the frog will die. It's got to be a moving, boom, zap. But we then have the intentional control of our eyes. So we can move our eyes around and our head. So it's not always going to be assumed that when things are moving on the retina, it means they're moving in the world. And sometimes they're moving in the world and our head is also moving. And the calculation of what must be going on to kind of figure which bit's contributed by us and which bit's moving in the world and then lock onto those, you need a lot of help. And the fact that you're locomotive and you've got a body and you've got hands and you're doing some hand-eye, very important. So I think, it would be, I think there's something wrong with Tyler's way of trying to, first of all, say, I'm just talking about constancy in vision. It's just the set of perceptual constancies in vision. I don't think they work for olfaction. I don't think, you don't need to do that divide and rule strategy. I think you should be looking at the constancies in the round, and then I think they will go much further than he thinks they go. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.